Alright, welcome back to Wrestling Retold and Relive with Richie Mars. I, of course, am your humble, gracious host, Richie Mars, and thank you for clicking on today's episode. Like I said in my previous episodes, you can follow us here on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. New episodes usually every Tuesday at Retold Richie Mars. You can go to our Instagram and TikTok. Those are the handles. And new content every day when you follow the TikTok. Usually try to get at least 3 videos out today on the current day wrestling product, and this episode is going to be current day wrestling related because some big stuff happened in the wrestling world this past weekend, and it was AEW All Out for the good and bad and the ugly reasons as well. And I'm just going to be talking about AEW for this episode, the pros, the cons, and I feel like the AEW discussion, the All Elite Wrestling discussion, is filled with either your one side or the other side. There's no room for nuance for whatever reason. You're either 100% pro or 100% con in everything they do in the creative aspect. And for me, I'm very nuanced when it comes to my approach on wrestling. No company is ever going to be 1000% in the right or 1000% in the wrong. There's always going to be things that I like. There are going to be things that I dislike. Sometimes within the same match, the same realm. Easy for me to say. But this is what this episode is about. Because for me personally, and when I post videos on my TikTok page, again, at Retold Richie Mars, when it's AEW related, it's never going to be a nuanced discussion. And I realize that. It's not going to be this was 100% good or 100% bad when it comes to the collective, all the comments, which is like how it is for most wrestling videos. But with this one, it's a little extra venom behind them because people either think AEW is the greatest thing that's happened to professional wrestling within the past couple years, or people think it's ruining the business at large. Both of which aren't true in my opinion. I will say that AEW in the professional wrestling landscape is a good thing overall for the professional wrestling industry because the more competition, the better. The more options you have when it comes to consuming wrestling as a media, it is a good thing because without competition, then people can just hit cruise control creatively. And you need that competition, whether you believe AEW's competition to WWE or not. You need another promotion to be on the air at the same time as WWE in order to guarantee more creativity and more push for WWE for trying new things. If it wasn't for AEW, I believe we wouldn't be in the renaissance that we're in. They want to call it the Renaissance era, right? I truly do believe AEW is a big part of that, for better or for worse. And I feel like with Triple H gaining control of creative has opened up a lot of doors for different people and for different promotions. We've seen the TNA Wrestling NXT partnership. Now, whether you want to say one side is benefiting over the other, that's a completely different discussion. But this wouldn't be happening unless AEW either didn't do it first because they had a TNA partnership first, or if WWE didn't see the benefit of targeting that market of fans that like other promotions other than WWE. Which brings me to AEW presently. Because I've had a lot of criticisms when it came to AEW, mostly in the creative sense, just questioning certain decisions, but every time I would question them, not in bad faith, mind you, it was always asking questions about certain things. I'll give you a perfect example. For AEW, they had the ranking systems for a while, and those kind of fell by the wayside once certain people left. And then earlier this year, they're like, okay, ranking systems are back. We're going to treat them seriously. I believe they came back around January, February of this year, and it was a main crux in getting Hangman and Swerve tied up so they could be in a triple threat match with Samoa Joe. I have no problem with that. But then after that match happened, the ranking system wasn't followed to at all. I remember Mercedes Moné coming in and saying she has next in line for the TBS championship. I'm like, okay, it makes sense that Mercedes Moné is a big star. She'll get a title match right off the gate. But how did they explain this with their ranking system? They did not. And that's the thing with AEW that pretty much me and I know a couple other people have complaints about. They don't explain things in storyline to where why is this happening? What is the reason for this happening? And when you ask people it or when you state that question, people will either say just sit down and watch and enjoy the product, or they'll make any kind of excuse for them. Oh, they're still a new company. They're still a new company. They're working out the kinks. They've been in business for only 5 years. But the thing is, you hire on a person that's supposed to be tracking these storylines and tracking the consistency of these storylines earlier this year, Will Washington. And I haven't seen much consistency when it comes to that, when it comes to what sense does it make that this person is getting a championship match and then like he just came off a losing streak before. Like if you want to go for the Kyle Fletcher Kazuchika Okada Continental Classic match that happened last week. And this is coming off of Kyle Fletcher losing to Ricochet the week before. Yes, he won against Ishii on Collision, but prior to that, all of Kyle Fletcher's Dynamite matches were losses. All those one-on-one matches, losses. So just winning one person, like winning against one person, that's going to justify this championship match. And I remember someone commented on it because I made a video on it saying, why don't you just enjoy the product? Or the match is going to slap either way, so who cares about the story? Yeah, it's going to be a great match, but there's no additive to it, There's no reason for me to care about who wins and who loses now. I know that AEW for a long time, they were going by wins and losses matter, but that's no longer the case. They don't have their win-loss record on the website anymore. They used to carry it, now they don't. So now they're going in a storyline direction, which is cool, which is fine. But that just kind of shows with the whole rankings and the whole wins and losses matter kind of deal. Their sports presentation, their sports side presentation is no longer going to be a factor on their television product. And for somebody like me who actually enjoyed that aspect when they actually tried at it, because it seems like here they didn't put full effort into making the sports presentation work, and rankings and wrestling in general are a tough thing to do, but when you actually commit to them, me as the viewer, I expect you to commit. Commit to the bit, commit to your creative decision. If you want me to say, hey, you're a legitimate company, and they are a legitimate company. They've done tremendous things within the past 5 years that no other wrestling company has done, and you gotta, even if you hate AEW, even if you dislike AEW, you have to give them credit. They have done things within wrestling within 5 years that no other professional wrestling company has done. And that's just the truth of the matter. But it's okay to say that something didn't work for the company. It's not a big deal to say, hey, this failed. Let's go in this direction instead. Anytime I would bring up, hey, they're not following the rankings, this doesn't make any sense, I would always get tremendous pushback from pro AEW fans, not like maliciously most of the time. It was mostly just, oh yeah, they still follow the rankings. I'm like, show me the examples, and then usually when I would make these points, they're just like, sit and enjoy. And the thing is, it's like, why aren't we allowed to ask questions about a product? That's my big concern. I don't ask questions because I'm trying to tear down the product. I'm asking questions in order to not only understand the product better, but also asking questions is how you broaden and widen your perspective of professional wrestling or any subject as a whole. And I feel like wrestling discussion, and this is any fandom discussion, could be wrestling, comic books, anime, whatever. It's either, like I said in the beginning, the greatest thing that happened or the worst thing that happened. And even if you're trying to do nuanced discussion where you're doing a pro, a con, you have 3 pros, 2 cons, whatever it is, vice versa, people will not be happy about that. because you're not 1000% on their side. And any fandom where you're not allowed to have nuanced discussion is a problem. Because if you're trying to, for example, Mercedes Moné, she's a very divisive topic within the wrestling industry because of how she carries herself, portrays herself, and any interview she does, people will take out the bad and accentuate it. Even if she says something good in the interview, it won't be as promoted as well. And if it was, then people will just kind of downplay it. Same thing happens with AEW, WWE. You're going to have a bias or a preference on what style of wrestling you prefer. And I feel like a lot of people, because there's a lot of tribalists within WWE, AEW, and I've seen them full-fledged, but with the AEW side, they're a lot more invested, I want to say. For example, there was somebody who had a problem with me posting a WWE video and me claiming to be an AEW fan and called me a tribalist. Now I don't mind being called names because I'm an adult and I could let that roll off my back. But when I said, hey, I actually went to AEW shows, like I posted it right on here. Like you could scroll down and you could look at the videos. I went to Forbidden Door, I went to World's End, had fun at both shows. It's really not that big of a thing to actually find out. And this person said, no, didn't happen, you're lying. Just like that. You see where the problem is when I'm trying to have a discussion about just wrestling in general, and people want to deny or discredit, even the proof is right there, just read the book. And then you can get the information there, but it's like, no, I already have all the information I have. Like the fact that we can't have a conversation about different perspectives in wrestling without getting highly emotional or discrediting the opinion, whether it's a well thought out opinion or just like an opinion that's just very broad, you gotta have conversation in order to dissect somebody's perspective. And then when you dissect that perspective, you can understand their opinion and where they're coming from, and if they're coming in good faith or bad faith. And I feel like AEW fans especially think that when a criticism happens, it's always in bad faith. And that's never my intention. Because I like watching WWE, I like watching AEW, I like watching TNA Wrestling, I like watching Ring of Honor, I like watching New Japan Wrestling. I like watching all forms of wrestling because I enjoy every aspect of the entertainment and what they bring to the table. Because no one goes to a buffet and only wants pancakes. Granted, pancakes are awesome. But I don't want to go to some place where it's just a pancake store. What about French toast? What about bacon? What about an omelet? What about eggs over easy? What about OJ or mimosas? You gotta have options in order to realize what you like. And maybe when you go someplace, you try some new food, and then you're like, oh wow, didn't recognize or realize that I liked this food before. Same thing in wrestling. And I feel like with AEW, it's so divisive, and I feel like how AEW portrays itself is also a realm for criticism. Because if you remember Tony Khan, he will take shots at WWE. WWE should take shots at AEW, but more in an indirect way. Tony Khan's a little bit more direct when it comes to taking shots at AEW on WWE, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's on the NFL draft, when you're trying to promote your own product and you're spending that time taking shots at WWE, it doesn't do anything progressive, in my opinion. And once that happens, and then you go into another interview, not even a couple weeks later, saying, oh yeah, I would like to have that conversation of possibly teaming with WWE, even though I don't think it happened. After you called WWE the Harvey Weinstein of professional wrestling, it's just not it's sending mixed messages to not only to the AEW fandom, but to the WWE fandom and the professional wrestling fandom as a whole. And with AEW, like they'll make statements like Tony Khan said, it's the safest uh, it is the safest realm for professional wrestling. It's the safest environment. And then you have segments like at All Out. Now, granted, I don't think wrestling is real, just throwing that out there. But when you're simulating Jon Moxley putting a plastic bag over Bryan Danielson's head, and you're doing the syringe spot with Hangman and Swerve, and also had a history with, even in the couple years ago, of Sammy Guevara tackling Matt Hardy where his head hit concrete, you don't really have room to talk to take the moral high ground when you've had some incidents that, whether it wasn't intentional, obviously, mistakes happen within the wrestling business, and you can't get the moral high ground when you have this same incidents that happened in a ring, for better for worse. And I feel like there are a lot of people who put the microscope to things that aren't really deserving of it. And what I mean by that is when something gets a lot of attention, immediately the microscope is going to be put under you. For a non-AEW example, Jade Cargill in WWE. Once she was signed, there were so many people putting the microscope under her to see how she would improve, how she wouldn't improve when she jumped to WWE. And if she makes one mistake, one slip up, like I know she did a springboard that didn't pan out well with one of the pay-per-views. And I know there was like an ending sequence, I think in Backlash, that kind of looked funky. And everyone kind of looked lost within that moment. And people were just like, either going like, see, I told you, WWE's not the right place for her. It's like, I told you, see, it's not AEW's fault that they're doing X, Y, and Z. It's really tough to get out under that stigma when you are portrayed in a way of, hey, you're in a new environment, your presentation's going to be different. You're going to be a larger-than-life superstar, and now you're making all these mistakes. That never happened at this place. You know, it's just like arguments like that, which are, in my opinion, not good faith. Because everything has to be contextualized in order to have these conversations. And I know a lot of people go with the AEW rating situation with their ratings declining, and WWE's ratings are declining too. The thing about that is why it's a little bit different if WWE's ratings are declining. With WWE, they have the stranglehold on the market. You know, they have the stranglehold on wrestling as a whole within the entire wrestling industry, which was smart by Vince McMahon when he decided to buy up all the territories. Whenever you talk to someone who doesn't know wrestling, the first thing they'll say is WWF or WWE. They're not going to say AEW. They're not going to say NWA, most likely. They're just going to associate professional wrestling with WWE. WWE is a genius when it comes to branding, because when it comes to superstars, it's not only a WWE superstar, which is the brand, it's the John Cena brand, which is why he had a new shirt every quarter. It's the Roman Reigns brand. It's the Cody Rhodes brand. It's the CM Punk brand. It's the Seth Rollins brand. WWE is an expert of marketing. And it shows, because whenever somebody thinks of professional wrestling, they think of WWE. And with AEW, it's smart to be the alternative. Now, going back to AEW's ratings, I think their viewership is now like 600 to 700,000 a week, which isn't bad because the expectations for Turner or TBS or TNT or Warner Brothers Discovery was 500,000 for the first episode of Dynamite, and they nearly more than quadrupled it the first episode, if I recall correctly. And now they're down to 600 to 700,000. So they're still meeting the Warner Brother Discovery expectations. But the thing is, there's no new fans that are coming in. There are no new fans that are making a significant change to AEW as a product. And I do feel like there is a gatekeeping aspect of it. You know, it's like, oh, you weren't here from the beginning, so AEW is my company. It's not your company. That's the weird thing that I found with tribalism, both with AEW, WWE, whatever. People say it's like, oh, it's us versus them. Man, you're not signed to a company that I know of. Why is this the us versus them deal? Couldn't we just all enjoy professional wrestling? But no, is what it is. But when it comes to the ratings, where it's like you have these storylines, like the Elite storyline, which was great for Jack Perry, you know, uh, didn't really do anything else creatively that was interesting. I mean, it wasn't interesting due to the fact the ratings haven't taken a significant change, like positively or negatively, just kind of stayed the same. But now you have the John Moxley, Marina Shafir, Claudio Castagnoli, and Pac faction, which a lot of people were theorizing a Shane McMahon, Shane McMahon entry into the company, which I think is a fine move. You know, I think Shane during WWE's creative lull during the Ruthless Aggression era, he did have some good ideas like ECW being an online show, and with that kind of became the brainchild of NXT later down the line. I think him as an on-screen character would generate some buzz, you know, especially with the Mr. McMahon Netflix documentary coming out and you having McMahon in a different company, in a different setting. That could spark some intrigue to it. I don't think it's the band-aid that AEW needs in order to increase the rating, but it's a good start. It's a good way to bring intrigue, which brings me to All Out, where the intrigue and alternative things happened. So in All Out, you had John Moxley celebrate Bryan Danielson's AEW Championship win, and with that, you had the controversy of John Moxley putting a plastic bag over Bryan Danielson's head, you know, simulating suffocation. And for me, it's just one of those things that was shocking for the sake of shocking. Now, if it's like an additive thing within this group that is just going to be unhinged for the sake of unhinged, you know, if it's a part of the presentation, then I'm like, okay, they're just very unhinged. All right. That for the story they're trying to tell, if they want to portray that, it's their company. It's not mine. You know, I might not like it, but that's how it is. That's how they're going to present these characters as the alternative. And the thing is, it's really tough when you have segments like that to expand to a wider audience, which is why WWE went to PG, because they're allowed to expand to a wider audience when it comes to sponsors, when it comes to television deals. And this is the reason why you're not going to see this segment on any platform. AEW even put out a statement within Storyline saying it was too gruesome that we're not going to show it within our social media platforms. And I would be surprised if they show it on AEW Dynamite. But again, if you want an alternative to WWE and AEW did something that was alternative to WWE, like you can't really like the segment could offend you, you know, by all means, but they did something that was the alternative. They did something that you wouldn't expect. And even though I'm not a fan of it, it's like, hey, they're trying to be different from WWE. And that kind of translates to the unsanctioned match with Hangman Page and Swerve Strickland, where there were a lot of spots that were, for lack of a better term, cuckoo bananas. Well, pretty crazy. Like you had the cinder block spots with the power bomb. You had the house call kick to the cage, which I thought was a cool spot. But the two major talked about spots were the needle syringe into the mouth of Swerve, and then the steel chair, like the gimmicked steel chair, which a lot of people like to throw that around as not being harmful. Oh, it was gimmicked. It was a gimmick chair, so it was okay that he got hit in the head. First things first with the gimmick steel chair. I don't like shots to the head like with any kind of even if it's gimmicked. I don't like that just because a blow to the head is still a blow to the head. And I read somebody, it's like, oh, like Rey Mysterio accidentally unalived somebody going for the 619. But the difference is that was an accident. This is like you're intentionally doing the spot, and with all we have with concussion research, I say, why add the risk to it? And I feel like, again, you might like it. You might like the chair shots to the head. You might say it's like, oh, as long as it's gimmicked, it's fine. But the thing is, it's like we don't know how they're gimmicked or what they're doing to the chairs. But again, it's performer discretion and company discretion. So even though I might not like it, it doesn't matter. It's not my company. I could make the decision saying it's like I watched the match, it was fine, but I didn't like this spot. And that's it. It's not a big deal. But if you're not 100% positive on something that happened within the company, which makes me think if this match had the WWE logo instead of the AEW logo on it, or if the CM Punk and Drew McIntyre feud had the AEW logo on it, how many opinions would change based on all of that? That's my question. It's almost like those blind taste testings, you know what I mean? When it's like you have all the labels ripped off of different sodas and you go to the person, all right, which one's Coca-Cola, which one's Pepsi, which one is RC Cola? You have all these like similar cola brands and you have to pick which one's which. And some people will be like, oh, that's Coke. It's like, oh, actually, that's Pepsi. Ha ha ha. You are a fan of Coke, but you actually liked Pepsi more than XYZ. Things that's what I think wrestling has become nowadays, where it's like, if you were to present this as a WWE or AEW product, and then you would present it in that form or fashion, people might switch their opinion just because of what the wrapping is. And I feel like a lot of fans are superficial like that. I think when people jump to different companies, it's an issue. I remember when Adam Copeland jumped from WWE to AEW, it was a big to do. Like, Adam Copeland's a liar. How dare he lie to everybody about where he was? And I looked at the video. He didn't lie at all. He said he had 2 offers from WWE, one from AEW, and he hasn't made a decision. And I was like, all right, so it seems like he's moving towards AEW. And when he jumped to AEW, people clowned on him for it. And I couldn't really understand why, because everyone cheered when he came back saying he wanted to finish his career on his terms. He then went to a different company wanting to finish his career on his terms, and his best friend happens to work at said company as well. But all of a sudden, we're not a fan of that. We don't appreciate that. We now don't like Adam Copeland, which is such a bizarre thing to me, where it's like, all right, the initials changed. That's cool. Like, I'm still going to support this individual who jumped from one brand to the other, because I'm not team WWE. I'm not team AEW. I am team get that bag. Get that money, please. Because the more money that stars are making, the more comfortable living they're allowed to make. Good for them, good for the business. And with AEW especially, when it comes to just like overpaying their talent, I don't care how much you're paying your talent. You're not paying me anything. So why am I criticizing this person who's a billionaire for overspending? I'm not balancing his checkbook. I'm not saying like, hey, you shouldn't pay XYZ for this talent. And I feel like people criticizing Tony Khan for overspending when they're not even remotely a part of the discussion of how much a talent gets paid is kind of humorous to me. I'm not going to lie. Again, sorry for all these scatterbrained thoughts, but this is just a lot of things to get off my chest about AEW. And another thing about AEW, like I made reference to before, I went to 2 AEW shows, World's End, Forbidden Door, had fun at both of them. It was a great time. The thing that I would criticize AEW the most, though, when it comes to their live shows, is their merchandising, is their merch sales, because every show I went to, all two of them, all two pay-per-views. But keep in mind, these are pay-per-views. These are big shows. The merch detail was not great at all. For starters, there was no t-shirts that were wrestler individuals. Like, I couldn't get a Swerve shirt, I couldn't get a Will Ospreay shirt, I couldn't get a Daniel Bryan shirt, Bryan Danielson shirt, I'm sorry. Wrong name, wrong company. I couldn't get a Tony Storm shirt, couldn't get a any kind of individual shirt. And I feel like that hurts their potential a little bit when it comes to live shows, just by the merchandising aspect. Also, the t-shirts, each of the t-shirts were like, I was there for Forbidden Door, I was there for World's End, were like $50. Like, that's a pretty big amount of money. Like, I know WWE, when they have their shows in town, usually their t-shirts are probably like, when I used to go, it was like 25, but I know they increased to like 40 by this point. But even then, it's like not even like 50, and they had like products that I wasn't interested in. Like, they were selling like the AEW tag belts for like almost $1,000. I wasn't sure if that was like the set of two or just like one individual, but I know like I saw $999.99 when it came to that. But just like things like that where they're working out the kinks, but feedback is important from this company and just any company in general, because I thought when AEW started, it was for the fans, by the fans. You know what I mean? We're doing what WWE's not doing. We're going to listen to our audience. But when you have people who have legitimate concerns with either creative or just legitimate feedback, like the very pro crowd just dogpile on that one, and just like dogpile in general on the person giving the critiques or feedback. And I feel like that's kind of an issue when it comes to AEW. Like, I feel like very, very, very pro AEW fans are steering away some people who want to enjoy AEW. Like, and if you say that AEW's audience isn't geared towards kids, like, based on my experience going to World's End Forbidden Door, there was a decent amount of families that were in the audience, you know? So I wouldn't say that, even though their product isn't geared towards kids. I think that's, like, to families especially, who do enjoy the wrestling product, whether it's WWE or AEW, it is important to at least be inclusive in that base as well. Another funny story that happened at Forbidden Door was, it was me and DFD, don't follow David, he's been on the podcast before, and we were just chilling, watching Forbidden Door, and there were two fans, very funny fans, great fans behind me, and they were talking to another one, and they were talking about, different discords, different groups they're in with wrestling on all over social media, and the topic of LA Knight being like not a great wrestler came up. And it's funny because we were talking to them earlier, and the baseball hat that I wear is an LA Knight hat, and as a joke I pulled it off my head and I just read to my DFD, LA Knight, yeah. And the fans got like, oh my god, I'm so sorry, we didn't mean you, I'm like, no, it's fine, don't worry. It's like, that's what wrestling fans do. We're supposed to have fun with the product. These are people who are oiled up, wrestling in tights for championships in a scripted setting. It is supposed to be fun. And that's what AEW, WWE is to me. And you're supposed to have conversations while also, clowning on certain things at times too, of the ridiculousness of wrestling. But I feel like a lot of people, myself included, I'm not excluding this, take wrestling seriously. And when I ask questions that are creative based, I do like getting different perceptions and different opinions when it comes to what people look in wrestling. And when you converse with people, when you talk to people, and saying it's like, oh, I didn't like this. Oh, why didn't like this? Oh, I didn't like it because of XYZ. It's like, oh, interesting. I liked it because of XYZ. And it's not like oh, you're right, oh, you're wrong kind of thing. It's like, hey, let's try to reach an understanding. It's like, we'll agree to disagree. And then we'll move on our ways. That's how positive interaction works. But the thing is, I don't think a lot of people want to, not necessarily compromise, but have a discussion that is productive enough for a wrestling setting, because no one wants their worldview on what wrestling is or isn't to be shattered or broken. And that's just kind of the wrong way to think, in my opinion. Because you should want to be challenged on your views of wrestling. You should want to be open to opinions and other thoughts. And then that's either going to strengthen what you already feel, or that's going to open up your eyes saying, I didn't really see it this way. And that's how it is. I had a discussion with Shayna Hill, great person, and we were talking about the Tony Storm Mariah May storyline, and it was Bald Bro's video, and he said it's probably the best woman story out there. And I commented, I'm like, it's probably either that or the Trish Stratus Mickey James one. And Shayna gave her opinions on why Tony and Mariah would edge out Mickey and Trish for a better feud, and I'd give my opinions on why Trish and Mickey might be considered a better feud to a lot of other people. And again, common discourse. No yelling, no saying your opinion's wrong, just saying, hey, here's the argument, here's the presentation of my ideas of why people might think like this. You agree? You disagree? You can see the perspective. If you don't, cool. If not, you move on. Not everything is an end of the world kind of discussion, but I feel like when you're trying to have a conversation, it then becomes almost like shaming that you're trying to have a conversation, where it's like, oh, why are you taking this so seriously? Just have fun. Just have fun with the product. And I'm like, well, you wanted to start a conversation, and I'm giving you reasons and explanations and everything like that. But now it's just like you're shaming me for having an opinion on something. And that's just kind of not productive. It isn't productive at all, actually. But with the whole wrestling world within AEW, it is very funny to me how much of an uproar people get about AEW for good or for bad reasons. And just the constant back and forth where it's like, oh, if WWE did this, XYZ. Another example, AEW's referee situation. Not my favorite thing to talk about because a lot of it's kind of hokey. Like I remember Hook had Roderick Strong in the Taz mission, and Aubrey Edwards, who was the referee, just walked over the feet that were under the bottom ropes. And the bottom rope, if your foot's under the bottom rope, the hold should be broken, but she deliberately just stepped over it. So I'm like, oh, so you did notice that there, so it shouldn't count, but we got to get the match thrown out anyway. Just like little disorganization things like that. Same thing with Bryce Rensburg. I think he pushed Jack Perry's foot so he could kick out, which was, I'm like, what? That was weird. But then people will be like, oh, what about Gunther and Orton at King and Queen in the Ring? And then I would explain different context because they actually, they screwed up, but they made a storyline out of it. So that was answered a couple months down the line. So I'll give AEW the leeway if they want to turn that into a storyline. Does it seem like that? I don't know. We'll see. And with how repetitive it kind of seems like AEW television shows are, because it seems like if somebody has an open challenge for a title or just a contendership match for a title, usually what happens is who's ever in the running who you don't think is going to win on either Rampage or Collision and then lose directly on Dynamite. It's just a very circular feeling. Same thing with Battle of the Belts. Now, if you don't know what Battle of the Belts are, it's kind of like AEW's Clash of the Champions that WCW used to have, just Saturday specials. And the thing is, they don't really promote them. Usually, the week before, they'll promote them. It's like, oh yeah, it's Battle for the Belts. And I'm just like, why am I supposed to be excited for this? Because, all these matches are just kind of thrown together. And it doesn't give me a reason to care to sit and watch down right away when you're going to upload majority of it to YouTube anyway. And I feel like that's where a lot of people catch up on wrestling or just watch wrestling in general is on social media. Which is why, even though television is important, it's not the only way to keep tabs on the wrestling product. And I do feel like AEW is going to be re-signed by Warner Brothers Discovery just because I see no reason of them not to, even though their ratings are 600,000 to 700,000 between that mark. because the initial goal was 500,000, like I said in the beginning of the podcast. And I'm not rooting for AEW's downfall. I think people are silly for that, because then what's going to happen is they're going to throw all their energy into WWE and then complain about WWE how they do things, just like how they complain about AEW how they're doing things. But the nuanced discussions need to start happening, and we can't decline from it, because there's going to be good and bad of everything. Not everything is going to be the picture perfect scenario for AEW, WWE. Nothing's going to be the perfect storyline. And if you say, hey, I didn't like this, here's the reason why, it's not negative for the sake of negative if you explain it correctly, or if you're not trying to dog on the promotion. Criticism when it comes to art, when it comes to entertainment, when it comes to sports, when it comes to video games, anything in general, isn't always a bad thing. Could there be nitpicky stuff? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Do you need to listen to all the nitpicky stuffs? No. You just take the feedback and then pivot from there to see if there's more of the same feedback or more of different feedback. And I think, besides saying it's like blaming the fan base for thinking a certain way, or blaming the wrestlers for doing something, or blaming the company for portraying a certain thing, to have more nuanced discussions when it comes to wrestling and not have everything be a black and white kind of perception through the looking glass. I think that will help wrestling a lot, and just entertainment in general. I don't think we'll ever get there because I don't think people will put aside their blind hatred or blind love for a certain promotion or promotions. But I'm going to do whatever in my power to actually have constructive discussions of WWE, AEW, a wrestler, a promotion, a creative decision, anything like that, because that's what I like doing. I like talking about the stories. I like how stories progress. Like the Hangman Swerve story, I thought the story beats were really well. You know, even though it's like I didn't like some aspects of some of the matches, you know, I thought I think it was their other no holds barred match they had, where it's like Swerve was like, or Swerve or Hangman were drinking the blood or anything like that. I'm just like, yeah, that doesn't need to be like in my wrestling. But again, it's not. It's up to the artist's discretion. You know what I mean? Up to the performer's discretion. Up to the company discretion, whether they okay with it or not. And same thing here. You know, wasn't crazy about the chair shot to the head, the needle. Was it? But like the whole thing was just seemed like, for me, it seemed like very fast forward and made the needle seem like less than as a result. Like the spots seemed too quick for just the emotional story beat that you could do with that. And I felt like I would have chosen one over the other if not the needle into the chair shot to the head. But yeah, overall, like, I think AEW is in a fine place. I don't think it's going to be bankrupt. It's going to exist as long as Tony Khan wants it to exist. And for that, it's like I just hope to continue to have more conversations when it comes to the AEW product at large, along with the WWE product. And I'm here to look at them as a separate entity from each other. I'm not here to compare and contrast. Oh, in WWE, they do this. That means AEW has to do that. You know, not like that. There's room for nuance in wrestling, so I will continue to have nuanced discussions. But that's going to do it for this week in Wrestling Retold and Relive with Richie Mars. I, of course, am Richie Mars. You can follow me at Retold Richie Mars on Instagram and TikTok. New videos every Tuesday. TTFN. Tata for now. And I will see you next time.